Chapter 44. Cale pored over Tarek's notes, comparing them to the clay tablets and his own, but his mind drifted back to Ayianna. Would she give in to Desmond? Couldn't she see he didn't love her? Why did Desmond even choose her? The man could have had any girl he wanted, but instead he pursued a young woman of mixed race, a thing he disdains. No, something wasn't right, and Ayianna didn't see it. He would have to stop Desmond from making any announcement, or taking matters into his own hands. "I knew I'd find you in here." Vian appeared in the doorway. He had traded his princely attire for Bon Zipeur's common tunic and pants dyed a deep shade of green, not unlike the colors of Badera. His mop of red curly hair bounced around his head and nearly touched his shoulders. "Don't you need a haircut or something?" Cale asked. Vian ran his hands through his curls. "No, I'm rebelling." He ducked out into the hall. "He's in here." "Of course." Eloith's voice floated into the library. "I told you he's hard-headed. He would have left 3 days ago if he could have had his way." "I can understand the earnest." Another deeper voice echoed in the hall. "Tarek." Vian reappeared with Tarek and Eloith in tow. Vian strolled across the study and flopped down on the couch against the wall. Eloith fluttered to the window and stood on the sill. He took a moment to observe the outside before turning his attention back to Cale. Tarek stopped in the doorway. His black curly hair flopped looser around his face than the other Haruzos. His skin was lighter, too. He could almost pass as a Saramor elf. Cale stood and bowed. "Welcome." "Thank you." Tarek returned the bow and strode over to Cale like a man content with life. "Vian's been telling me about your adventures out east and how you two took down a troll in Nganjo. Very impressive." "Ah, thank you." Cale shifted. "Sometimes we surprise ourselves with our abilities when we are placed in challenging circumstances." Tarek crossed his arms, rested against the table, and grinned. "That sounds like something Nevin Said would say." "I did spend the last 6 years under his tutelage." Oh, the wonder to sit and learn at a master's feet. Tarek leaned over and sifted through the pile of parchments. "Have you found my notes helpful?" Cale nodded and picked up one of the parchments. "You've done well, and from your notes it seems you've already mapped out the journey. I must ask, why did you choose that route? We were considering taking the old highway down to the sea and sailing to Ganya." "Stark's Peak is closer. We can retrieve the silver pine cone, then descend into the jungles from there, make our way to the sea. If all goes well, I'm hoping the Kaleki will fly us back to the plains. If we were to go the route you suggest, the mountain passages will be perilous in the spring. We'd have to contend with ornery bears, mudslides, and swollen rivers from all the melting snow." "What?" Vian sat up. "It'll take us that long?" Tarek shrugged. "I'm being generous with the calendar. I've calculated extra time for possible setbacks. Once we've crossed the mountains, we can take a boat down the river quicker than it would be to sail through the treacherous waters of Tortuga Sea. Besides, the old highway deposits you right in the middle of the Johederan Cove, a pirate haven." "Oh." Cale glanced at the map on the table. Sailing had sounded the easiest and the quickest route. He should have remembered the dangers of Johederan, aside from the fact that the old highway would take them into the land of the Wolfsamer elves. He sat back down. "It makes sense, but are you certain you want to join us?" Tarek lifted the map. "I've spent 5 years among the stoic dwarves and was able to observe their interaction with Ereshel. And then I spent 3 years in the jungle." He looked at Cale, his amber eyes so much like Saeed's, but otherworldly. "I think I can be of service to you in your quest." "And what about the Kaleki?" Vian asked. "I accompanied my uncle on business meetings a few times when I was a youth." "You are making Badera sound more and more isolated," Vian frowned. "Not that my father didn't travel. He used to. Zuriel, Praeton, Kavaskoon, Stradivec, even Bon Secours. But when I came along, he stopped." He shrugged. "At least that is what the servants have said." "Not everyone is so well-traveled or has the means to." Tarek returned the map to the table. The prince's face clouded. "I have plenty of—" "I didn't mean to offend." Tarek raised his hands. "I'm merely a nephew, not quite as impressive as a prince. Still, I'm impressed, Cale crossed his arms. You sound like you've travelled as much as the Guardians. Tarek shrugged. I have no mother or father. I have no intentions of being a leech to my aunt and uncle. So I decided I would become an ambassador. That is noble enough, Cale cocked his head. Have you considered becoming a guardian? Tarek smiled. Perhaps. Cale stretched and then clasped his hands behind his neck. You're welcome to join us, but I don't think we'll need a guide. The journey seems pretty straightforward. You don't need a guide to find a place on a map. Tarek ran his finger along the Kavaro mountain range. You'll need someone who knows what's not on the map. The creatures you'll encounter, the customs of the people you'll likely run into. Hopefully none if you're lucky. What do you mean, creatures? Vian eyed the map. The Disamilis hunt the trails of Kavaro looking for souls to feed on. Then there's the pesky glottals and their little annoying darts. Although I don't think we'll need to worry about them too much. They're only a bother in the summer and early fall. Then there's the Clordon that roam the jungle at night. Some say it's a gorilla. Others say it's some kind of beast that escaped the underworld. You expect us to believe this? Vian asked. Yes. Tarek folded the map. And we'll need to update your weapons. Where you are going, your swords and shields will fail to protect you. Cale leaned forward. If what you say is true... He speaks truth. Iluith hopped off the window and fluttered over to the table. He rested his hands on his hips. An ally against the natural and the unnatural world would be greatly appreciated. So are we in agreement then? Cale glanced at Vian. Of course, Vian stood. I don't want to face a DC something or another by ourselves when we have someone with experience to join us. More the merrier, right? He stuck out his hand. Welcome. Tarek looked down at Prince's offered palm. What do you want me to do with your hand? You shake it. Tarek grasped Vian's hand. I must journey beyond the desert soon. My travels have only taken me west. He faced Cale. When do you plan to leave? As soon as we can. Cale stood and smiled. Tarek's presence emanated a sense of peace and wisdom, much like Saeed's. It would be like having the headmaster on their quest. Almost. But almost was better than facing the quandary with Ayianna and Desmond alone. Tarek nodded. I will see what supplies we can secure for our journey. Shall we check out the weapons? Yes, Iluith's wings snapped open and he sprang into the air. About time! The wide stone stairs descended deeper and deeper beneath the palace of Bonzapur. Tarek's torch hissed in the eerie silence. Fine silt covered the steps and walls and grated beneath their feet. Cale shivered. The memory of Zazur's quiet but deadly halls flitted at the edges of his mind, despite his senses telling him everything was fine. Entering the armory, Tarek lit the torches hanging against the walls. The darkness gave way to long shadows, revealing rows of tables filled with all sorts of weapons and shields. Swords, halberds, spears, and axes lined the walls. The massive chamber smelled of old oil and dust. Iluith gave a shout of joy and flew off to inspect the weaponry. Once a captain, always a captain. Cale smiled. He had only been a guard, but the excitement was contagious. He scanned the multitude of weapons. Where were the longbows, crossbows? He slowly turned. Didn't Haruzo have armor? Tarek selected a sword from the wall and tossed it to him. Cale caught it in mid-air with ease and swung it around. The runes of Tarok marched up the blade in straight, tiny columns, rigid but practical, not like the elves' flowing script and detailing scrolling. Why did the dwarves have to sacrifice art? Still the blade balanced well. Cale handed it back to Tarek. It's well crafted. All dwarven blades are. Tarek tilted it to the light. The inscription reads, Skagog. Honors truth, its blade brings freedom. From the Ingazan clan? Tarek nodded. Their blades have been treated to give them strength against creatures that do not have flesh. No other sword is as strong as these. Vian picked up a shield with intricate carvings in its metal casing. Rays of gold swirled outward from a circle like an ornate sun. The Naka shield. It bears the crest of Nalu, Tarek said. But Dara's crest is not so different. Vian set the shield down. All right, Tarek scanned the room. We will need the belts and pouches over here, but don't open them yet. And those wooden moons over there. Wooden moons? Cale selected a black one with red dots forming diamonds along the smooth wood. The width of the arcs curved outward and stretched the length of his forearm. "This is a weapon?" "It is the Cloda Zuchidi, to be exact. The pygmy tribes of the Remanga jungle use them for hunting, among other things." "Like a club?" "No, you throw it like this." Tarek flicked his wrist and the wooden moon sailed through the air. "Better duck." But before Kel could respond, the wooden moon whistled past his head and almost clipped Vian as he dove under the table. Tarek caught it and stuck it in his belt. "A little more warning, please." Vian crawled out from the table. Tarek smiled. "These have been reinforced by the dwarves, making them one of the best weapons against the Disamilis." "That is interesting," Kale said. "These haven't been used in a very long time." Vian ran his fingers through the thick layer of dust covering everything. "We haven't had need for them." Tarek picked up some belts and handed them to Kale. "Didn't you use them on your travels?" Vian asked. "The Haruzos have other advantages," Tarek smiled. His amber eyes reflected the torch's dancing flames and glowed silver, except against the pygmy tribes. Vian eyed the wooden moons. "I hope we don't meet any of your pygmy friends." "We will take the 4 Naka shields." Derek selected the shields and placed them near the door. "Divide the clodas and belts, Kale putting each one with a shield." Kale nodded and did so. Vian's eyes narrowed. "Are we to replace all of our swords and shields?" "For the most part." Tarek hauled a ladder to a wall of shelves. "Unless you want to carry a double load." "He knows all about carrying a double load, don't you, Vian?" Kale slapped the prince on the back. Vian scowled. "I don't see the difference between your sword and mine." "You're right, you can't. But the enemies we will fight will know the difference." "Have you ever fought against the Disemili or the Clordan?" Tarek asked as he climbed a ladder. "No." "The Melis have no flesh and bones for us to touch, yet they can harm us." Tarek grabbed a sack from the shelf and descended. "These miserable hags are bent on stirring up your past and all your failings. Then they suffocate you with despair and ultimately bring you to your death, self-induced at times." "So what stops them?" asked Vian. "The Cloda Zuchidi, the wooden moons." "I see." Vian arched his brows. "What about the Clordan gorilla thingy?" "Let's just hope we don't run into one." Tarek held up one of the silk purses he had pulled from the sack. "These contain a powdery substance that will protect us from the Clordan while we sleep." Tarek divided the silk pouches between Kale and the others. "I'll need 2, Kale said. "One for Ayianna." Tarek tossed him another and continued to browse through the various weapons. "How is she doing?" Vian asked. Kale shrugged. "She is doing all right, I guess. The Queen is helping her prepare for the journey." "Have you seen Desmond?" "Not after last night." Kale fingered the silk pouches. "How would you feel if he didn't join us?" Vian cocked his head. "Are you going to ask him to stay behind?" "Maybe." "Well, don't you think having another swordsman would benefit us?" Vian crossed his arms. "I know he can be a little difficult, and he has some issues, but he is my friend. He's just under pressure right now." "As if we aren't?" "Point taken, but he's not used to a girl resisting him." "Don't blame Ayianna for his behavior," Kale said. "Oh no, I don't mean that." Vian ran his hands through his hair. "It's probably good for him. Maybe it'll teach him a few things. Just give him time. Once this is all over, he'll be back to his old charming self. That's what I'm afraid of." "Look what I found!" Eloith cried as he flew toward them, carrying a miniature bow. "A Nagiso crossbow! Tarek, where did you get this? And the Noki!" "After the great Nagiso rebellion, your queen gave us these and more." "What is a Noki?" asked Vian. "They are small stones used in a sling. Anything you hit will turn to salt," Eloith replied. "Will they work against those beastly hags?" Vian reached for the bag. Eloith jerked upward, holding the stones out of reach. "I haven't tried it." Tarek pried open a barrel. "I'd never wanted to risk it, especially knowing that the Clodas worked." "And we only have 6, Kale said. "I think." Eloith gave the bag of stones to Kale. "Ayianna should have the stones and my Cloda." "What about you?" Vian asked. "The Disemilis can't harm me." Vian frowned. "Well, aren't you the lucky one?" "Well, I think we have a good start on the weapons." Tarek gathered his share of supplies. "I'm famished. Let's go eat." Kale nodded and stuffed the Noki into his sack for Ayianna. "Eloith, did you find a sling?" "I found an elven sling, and it'll work. A fairy one would probably be too short for her. Eloise handed Cale a leather sling, and Cale placed it inside the sack along with the silk pouch and braided belt. A wisp of excitement fluttered in his stomach. He couldn't wait to see her face when he gave it to her.